Vic Fangio era for the Denver Broncos has officially ended, and on Sunday morning, the Broncos and George Paton decided to move on from the Broncos' former head coach. Now, the search begins for a brand new head coach. We hear George Paton's goals for this upcoming offseason, and we talk about what the next ideal head coach needs to have for the next Denver Broncos head coaching position in terms of leadership. We talk about that and much more with Broncos Country on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day. The Broncos are going to be in search of a brand new head coach to lead the team in the 2022 NFL season. Real quick, today's episode of Locked on Broncos is brought to you by our good friends over there, onlinegambling.com, the place to be for all the latest gambling news and tips throughout the NFL playoffs. Visit onlinegambling.com/NFL to get the edge over the competition throughout this year's playoffs. From the south stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Make sure you follow and subscribe, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and hit that thumbs up button here on YouTube to help push it out to more Broncos Country members all across the world there. And thank you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, my friend, hey, it's great to see you. No time wasted by Broncos general manager George Paton as he began his search for a brand new head coach. The search really begins on Monday, but the process means informing Vic Fangio and the staff that, hey, changes are coming.
It's, I hate to say I'm not surprised by it, Cody. I mean, I feel like the Broncos could have just waited a couple more hours. You know, I'm always indisposed on Sunday morning, so I can't, I get all these texts. My phone is blowing up with the news breaking and everything. So, but here we sit, and George Paton, he delivered a great message to Broncos Country. Sounds like from what you told me, because I missed the Joe Ellis presser too, it sounds like Joe Ellis had an impassioned, press conference, and I think that the ultimate takeaway right now, Cody, is that the Broncos want to move into a place of stability. Go figure. I mean, that seems obvious, but at the same time, George Paton, although he's only been with the team 1 year, he seems to understand and realize that this team has been cycling through head coaches. Now, the Gary Kubiak thing wasn't necessarily John Elway's fault or anybody's fault. Gary Kubiak obviously stepping away due to health reasons. But since that time, it's been very, very difficult for the Broncos to find any sort of continuity at the head coaching position. We'll all remember, even back in the John Fox days, I don't think anybody was super excited about the things John Fox was doing. So in the John Elway / now George Paton eras, it's kind of gotten to the point where it's like, all right, we kind of really need to step back, as George Paton said, cast a wide net, and find the right guy who's going to lead this team into the future.
Well, before we get into what George Paton said in terms of his goals for this offseason here, let's really look back at the Vic Fangio era. 3 seasons as a member of the Denver Broncos, leading them a 19-30 record. Now, one thing I did want to point out, now, this episode is not going to be a show where we just bury Vic Fangio. Look, I think that's not the right way to do it. You're going to have these other media outlets that are going to go out there, they're going to bury Vic, they're going to talk bad about him. But, here's the thing. Let's operate with class, ladies and gentlemen. For Vic Fangio, I will say this, based on talking to players, talking to some coaches in the building all throughout his tenure here in 3 years, one thing Vic Fangio has done in his time, yes, the wins and losses, the winning side of that did not come for the Broncos, unfortunately enough. But what Vic did, Vic instilled the foundation and a culture that is really good for this players. I mean, in the Vance Joseph days, the offense was so divided against the defense and vice versa. Players weren't as tight-knit in the locker room. There was a lot of cliques. There was a lot of separation there. This is a Broncos locker room with the players that are currently on the roster right now that is super close with one another. The defense with the offense with the defense, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. It is a very tight-knit unit, which, look, this makes it very appealing for the next Broncos head coach here, Sayre. So, I do want to talk about that in terms of the culture that he has built, right? We talked about foundation in the post-game report. The foundation is there. Whoever the next coach will be, they're going to, it's going to be very appealing for them to come in and be able to have the roster and the personalities that have already been instilled in this locker room. That's one thing that we will remember about Vic Fangio, and wish him the best in whatever he decides to do next, more than likely becoming a D coordinator. And look, he could become a D coordinator with the Las Vegas Raiders with the Jim Harbaugh rumors circulating there. So we'll have to see about that. But, Sayre, one other thing too, Pat Shurmur and Tom McMahon, both the coordinators for the Broncos, have also been informed that they will not be returning next season. So Broncos country, obviously, the offense not good enough, special teams far too inconsistent. Changes are coming in that regard there. But I kind of wanted to pinpoint this, Sayre. Obviously, with the head coaching search, Joe Ellis has completely turned things over to George Paton. And he said here in the press release, Georgia will have full authority to select the next head coach for the Denver Broncos. This is his decision and his program. Hearing that, I mean, what are your general thoughts as the Broncos will begin their next search for the head coach beginning on Monday?
I get really excited about that, honestly. I think George Paton is an incredibly sharp guy. I think obviously him being around the league for as long as he has and having the staying power that he had in Minnesota. I mean, I don't want to say he went down necessarily with the ship there when he was with the Vikings, but man, he was there through thick and thin from 2007 to 2020. I mean, that's a long time to be in one place in any profession, in any job, but especially in the NFL. Where a guy's getting offered to be promoted almost annually for the last decade. I want to see how George Paton, who has had that kind of staying power, approaches a head coaching search. And you're absolutely right, Cody. Vic Fangio did a lot of stuff right. The fact that Garrett Bowles developed from a bust into a stud left tackle, that wasn't all on Vic Fangio, but Vic Fangio was able to convince Mike Munchak to come on board the staff, and that one thing led to another, and they held Bowles to the high standard. His development, player development in general, they did a great job with that stuff, and like you said, the foundation is there. And for the next head coach to come in, obviously the quarterback is going to be the major priority, but to me, I feel like with George Paton being the guy that's in charge, and that makes sense, right? I mean, he might be the only guy among, Joe Ellis, John Elway, George Paton. He'll probably be the only guy that's here beyond this season. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I can't wait to see how he goes about assembling a staff. And like I said, he's going to cast a wide net. The candidates are all going to be, they're all going to be seriously considered. I think everyone kind of wants to say, well, here's the current favorite, or here's the list of top three. There may be some favorites at this point in time, people, but I think it's important to note that George Paton is going to be thorough in the search. And like we were talking about off the air, Cody, since he got hired, things don't leak out of Broncos HQ. They just don't. Nobody knew who they were drafting. Nobody knew who their top targets were in free agency. So obviously, as Joe Ellis gives this over to George Paton, we have now only to wait and see we've seen what George Paton can do with the draft. We've seen what he can do in free agency with the bottom end of the roster, building a team from 1 through 90. What will he do now with the coaching staff? I personally, I'm buckled in. I'm ready to go. Playoffs, that's going to be fun to watch. I'm way more interested in what's happening off the field in Denver.
Yeah, no, spot on. This is an important time for Broncos country. And look, we're going to get into everything. We got you covered all year long, Broncos country. So like Sayre said, strap in your seatbelts, buckle in, hold on for the ride. And we're going to talk about George Paton's outlook for his goals this offseason. Very reflective in Sunday's press conference with the media, talking about this past season, talking about how he views the future. You get that and more coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor. Today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our good friends over there at Built Bar. Ladies and gentlemen, you know it as the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. Ladies and gentlemen, it tastes legitimately 100% like a candy bar. It's soft, it's easy to chew, but it's the healthiest protein bar that is out there on the market today. And I'll tell you exactly why here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavors that you can check out at built.com. If you need extra fuel to help get yourself through the day, Built Bar is the way to go, because each bar contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. And I want you and your family to get yourself a box of Built Bar today. Try all the amazing flavors that they have, whether it's one particular flavor, or you could get a mixed box of all the flavors so you can figure out which flavor is your favorite by going to built.com. And when you go to checkout, use promo code LOCK15. That's going to get you 15% off your next order today at built.com. Once again, promo code LOCK15 gets you 15% off at built.com. And our good friends over there at Online Gambling. And we're all looking for an edge these days, and I'd like to thank Online Gambling for sponsoring today's episode of Lockdown Broncos. If you don't know already, OnlineGambling.com is a website dedicated to giving gamblers the edge. Throughout the playoffs, they're providing you with the best NFL tips, news, and more to help make your bets as informed as ever. And Online Gambling gives gamblers the edge by providing the best and most trusted experience online all day, every day, inspiring every gambler in the world to beat the odds. Don't make emotional decisions with your hard-earned dollars. Make informed decisions with information sourced by experts. Be sure to consult OnlineGambling.com before placing your bets. OnlineGambling.com is on a mission to be the world's most empowering gambling and betting website, giving gamblers the edge by providing the best and most trusted experience online all day, every day. And OnlineGambling.com is inspiring every gambler in the world to beat the odds. So check it out today. Make sure you visit OnlineGambling.com/NFL for all the latest gambling news and tips to give you the best edge throughout the playoffs. Remember, OnlineGambling.com/NFL to make the most of this year's playoffs. All right, Sayre, as we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, really diving into the discussion here. We are talking about Vic Fangio's tenure as head coach for the Broncos. Once again, we just want to wish him the best in his future endeavors. Now the Broncos look to a brand new head coach. But before we can get to a new head coach, we got to hear from Broncos GM George Paton on Sunday, who met with the media to talk about the last season. I mean, what we saw here in 2021, 2022 from this Broncos football team, obviously in his first season as GM, things didn't go the way that he wanted. One thing that stood out to me of his press conference, so Sayre, very reflective. He didn't want to just pinpoint it on coaching. Look, everyone's saying, hey, everyone wants to, he was open about it. Everyone wants to blame just coaching. It's not just coaching. It's everybody. It's things that maybe I could have done better. We all fell short. And that's, I think, what the Broncos need, accountability. And look, it's coming from George Paton. He's saying all the right things. But I want to go through here now in terms of his goals here for this offseason, because he was very open, very transparent, which is something I've admired. You did mention it. Not a lot of leaks are coming out of that headquarters, and that ever since he has really taken over as the GM. And I want to say, if you see anything out there right now that's saying George Paton already has his guy in mind, it's not true. It's just speculation. None of that is evident right now because the Broncos, they are open on casting a wide net for the head coaching search here. One thing that George Paton did say in his press conference, so Sayre, that I think stood out to me, it resonated with me the most. He said that, the organization, we have to look in the mirror ourselves as to how we've done things. He reflected on it. It's not just coaching. He touched on the fact that he said, we've had 5 coaches in 9 years and something's not working. So they're trying to figure out what it is that's not working. Very retrospective insight here by George Paton. I mean, like I said, he's very open and transparent, which Broncos Country, I think, can respect that.
I love that he said that, and I love that you bring it up too, because Vic Fangio can't be a scapegoat for the struggles this team has had at the quarterback position, right?
Yeah.
You don't move on from Vic Fangio based on the fact that, hey, like he said after the game, and I think maybe some of this from his vantage point kind of came from a place of emotion. But remember, he was asked after the game, like, what do you think sets you guys apart in in the bad way from the other 3 teams in the division? He's like, they all have top flight quarterbacks. And that's the reality. And I think that we've brought this up on other shows. Like, you put a quarterback in place, Vic Fangio is probably going to look like a very good head coach. That's just that's the reality of things. So George Paton did a great job establishing the fact that Vic is not a scapegoat for this. And he's right. Everyone has to look in the mirror at why this is happening. Why is the team not having success? I think we could boil it down pretty simply to the quarterback position, but we know that, Cody, that it's not that simple. I mean, how many Super Bowl titles has Aaron Rodgers won? I mean, it doesn't necessarily make you immediately a Super Bowl champion, but I do think that when they look in the mirror, they're going to discover, hey, we kind of understand, and they probably already understand this. If we have a QB, I mean, we're going to be a pretty darn good team, and the new head coach that's coming in, he's going to look pretty darn good. And Vic Fangio is going to look, he's going to look good for setting that foundation that we talked about in the previous segment. And I think obviously the Broncos, part of that foundation is some of the other coaches that they do have in place. We know that a new coach is going to be able to come in and kind of call the shots, but obviously George Paton had a quote about that as well. He said, we have some really good coaches here. It'll be up to the new head coach to determine if they stay. That we've talked about, Ed Donatel before. Could Ed Donatel be under consideration as DC? I don't know. Is that maybe the primary name that you think of, or is it other assistants? Cody, who do you think? I mean, you don't have to necessarily go through the entire roster of coaches, but who do you think might be sticking around?
Well, it's a hard question to answer right now because we just don't know what who the new head coach will be, how they operate, and we'll obviously allude to what the Broncos are looking for in their next head coach. But Ed Donatel did speak with 9 News here and did say with our 9 News reporter Mike Kliss that he would love to stay and finish the Broncos mission that they have created. And look, I can tell you this: Ed Donatel inside that locker room, well regarded, well loved by the players. He's a great coach. He's a great teacher, and so I think a lot of it will be dependent upon if once the new head coach comes in, Does he want to bring in somebody? Does that new head coach already have somebody in mind, or is he open to bringing in a guy right here? We do know one thing: nobody on the current Broncos staff will be in consideration for the new head coaching spot. However, I do think it'd be very hard pressed for the Broncos to move on from guys like Chris Cooper, Mike Munchak at this point, and even Christian Parker, who just came over from the Green Bay Packers organization. The more I think about it, too, and I'm just throwing a spitball out here, if the next head coach has any ties to the Packers organization, I could see Christian Parker staying on, potentially as an in-house DC candidate or still as the Broncos DB coach there. So something to keep in mind there. But I would love to see Ed Donatel stay, Mike Munchak, obviously for the reasons we've seen there with the Broncos offensive line, the growth that those guys have made throughout this season, the development that's been there, something to touch on there. But, one thing that George Paton did mention as they search for their next head coach there, he's got to be a great leader. He says most important thing is to get the right leader in place. And the one thing that he said multiple times, leadership. They have to be a good leader. And this was also asked on the questions of, are you looking for an offensive-minded guy or a defensive-minded guy? I know fans are so caught up on whether it's going to be a guy who's an offensive guru or expert or thing like that, renovationary, or even defense. And they're talking about that. George Paton says, we don't want it to be just one side of the ball. We can't neglect one side of the ball. We need the right leader in place. And I'm very optimistic that the Broncos are going to cast a wide net to have the good guy there. But, Sayre, he did mention that quarterback will be a priority for them at some point. But getting the right leader in place is the most important thing right now.
It is. And there's two guys that really stick out, obviously, that we know about in terms of leadership. Two coaches that have been to the Super Bowl, one that has won a Super Bowl. I don't know how many coaching circuits that we have. Actually, there's multiple Super Bowl winning coaches that are out there if you include guys like Jim Caldwell. But, man, the more recent head coaches to win Super Bowls include Doug Peterson and Dan Quinn. Obviously, you don't get to the Super Bowl just by accident. And I would contend that over the last, decade or so, and I don't know if you disagree with me on this, Cody, but I would contend that both Dan Quinn and Doug Peterson kind of made it to the Super Bowl with some of the weaker quarterbacks that have made it to the Super Bowl in the last decade or so. So no disrespect to obviously Matt Ryan or even a guy like Nick Foles and Carson Wentz, but I'm just saying, I feel like those two guys have proven their leadership capabilities. We know Jim Caldwell. I'm sure Peyton Manning would vouch for him as well as a Super Bowl winning coach. And those guys learned from great leaders as well. All those coaches did. So they've been under great leadership. And we know this in any walk of life. If you're a great leader, it's because you learn from great leaders. So I think who these coaching candidates have learned from is going to be important, which makes the potential of a Patriots type of guy even interesting. So we'll kind of see what happens there, but I'm interested to find out. And I think that leadership obviously deserves to be a top priority because these players, that's what they need. They need somebody to come in and lead this team.
Outside of leadership, what does the next head coach for the Denver Broncos need to have? That's something that Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we come up with, and we're going to discuss here in just a moment with Broncos Country. But before we get into that, let me just tell Broncos Country real quick about the other sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. That's our friends over there at the Get Upside app. In Broncos Country, there's an incredible app out there where everyone who buys gas, they need to know about it. It's the Get Upside app, and listeners of Lockdown Broncos, they're making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time that they fill up. All you got to do is just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN, and you can get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the gas pump ever again and get cash back using the Get Upside app. All you got to do is just download the app for free, use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making up to as $200 to $300 per tank fill up with the Get Upside app today and cash back. And there is no catch. The cash back gets automatically added to your account, and you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app. Use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN today with the Get Upside app. All right, Sayre, as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Once again, Broncos Country, mile high salute to you. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we like to bring Broncos Country, both sides of the coin on every perspective that's going on in Dove Valley without the overreactionary hot takes or emotional clickbait stuff. We don't believe in that stuff, and we appreciate you and your interaction in the comment sections and also for listening to us on your favorite podcasting provider and here on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, hit that thumbs up button here on YouTube as well. help push us out with the algorithm to more members in Broncos country as we continue to grow things here. The Locked On Broncos podcast every single day, because there is no offseason for the true fan. Sayre, all right, my friend, the conversation today, we've reflected on Vic Fangio. We've talked about George Paton's goals that he laid out in terms of the offseason plan. I do want to touch on Joe Ellis, the Broncos CEO. One thing that was asked of him on Sunday about the ownership situation, he said, right now they're still going through the court process on the right of a first refusal with the trial. So he cannot legally comment on the ownership situation right now for the Broncos. He did say, hey, I did communicate. We do have a plan, but until this is resolved legally, we cannot comment on it. So obviously that's going to be a process that does weigh out for the Denver Broncos. But Joe Ellis was fired up. I mean, you could tell in his presser, he was tired of losing as well. He said, I'm one of the hundreds of thousands of members of Broncos country that's sick of it. And there was to a point where he was even saying that, how many years have I sat up here at the end of the season and have said the same thing, that we've got to find a way to get winning? He's like, I'm tired of it. We got to figure out how to do it. And he says, whether it's this year with me still running things here in 2022, or it's next year with the new person, the new president, CEO that's eventually going to take over the team, we don't know who that's going to be. I really liked what I heard from Joe Ellis. And look, I think you made a great point. We were talking before we went on air here. I think there's this narrative out there. There's this myth that, people think that Joe Ellis is happy with the Broncos losing. And Sayre, I'm going to let you talk about that, because it is the furthest thing from the truth.
It's so ridiculous. It's the same people who talk about the fact that until the Broncos get an owner, nothing is ever going to change. And it's like, who cares? I mean, I care about who the owner is, but my gosh, how many franchises in pro sports have we seen destroyed by their owners? And Joe Ellis, he was a person, I don't know if anybody actually knows this. He was a person who actually knew Pat Bowlen personally. He walked with him, he worked with him, he knew him. So we always want to put words as Broncos country, and not everybody, this isn't 100%, thing, but people always want to put words in Pat Bowlen's mouth, and may the Hall of Famer rest in peace. Obviously, he did amazing things with the Broncos, and obviously he bled orange and blue. Joe Ellis, it's not like he doesn't like the Broncos. It's not like he's personally disconnected. Like you mentioned, he's a member of Broncos country. And for anybody in Broncos country to think that the people that are in charge of this team don't want them to win is absolutely ridiculous. If that's the way that you think, let me just try to help shift your perspective a little bit. I've mentioned this, I don't know how many hundreds of times. The team needs a quarterback. And if you get a quarterback, all of a sudden, everybody else in the organization looks a lot better. I don't know, who anybody in Broncos country would say, if I was to take a poll and be like, all right, who do you think is the best owner in pro football? Hit me with it. I don't know what people would say or who they would say. I don't know if they even know all 32 owners in the NFL, or what qualifies them to be the best owner. I mean, everybody knows Jerry Jones. Why? Because he's constantly meddling in his coach's business. He's constantly, he's the GM of the team. Everything rises and falls with him. So if they're bad, well, everybody wants Jerry Jones out of that seat. Remember, before Dak Prescott, Cody, I remember very clearly a lot of people on Twitter wanted Jerry Jones out of his seat. A lot of Cowboys people are talking, they want Jerry Jones out of there. Why? Because they didn't have a QB. And so that's the primary issue. And finding a quarterback is way easier said than done. And I can't help but think it's going to be way more difficult this offseason than just slapping a number 12 and Rodgers on the back of a jersey, or slapping a number 3 and Russell or Wilson on the back of a jersey. I don't know if it's going to be that easy. And so what I think George Paton, to circle it all back around, what George Paton was talking about today, 5 head coaches in 9 years, what he's saying, and to me, this is how I perceive it. What George Paton is saying is that the next guy we hire, you got to be patient. You got to be willing to watch this thing grow if that's the way that it's going to go. We're not just going to put somebody in a microwave and say, all right, 2 to 3 years, and then you're gone just like everyone else. No, what he's talking about when he says five coaches in 9 years, he's talking about not that I'm going to give a guy 10 years to figure it out, but we're going to give somebody the necessary time and understand, the situation and the context. If we don't get a QB, the coach is going to have a hard time having success.
One thing I really want to see the brand new head coach have, look, we've talked about it, the Broncos, they must cast a wide net, and they plan to do so. Not just 2 to 3 guys. It's going to be multiple people that are going to get a chance to interview for this next head coaching job. And there is no rush to get the guy signed right away. I know that there's this narrative out there that the Broncos need to have their next head coach by next week. That's simply not the case. It needs to be a well thought out process, folks, because I think the linear thinking of going through and getting a guy right away, I think it's very dangerous. Ideally, throughout the interview process. You're going to have your favorites. Guys are going to move up to the top of the list, but you have to go through everybody. You have to turn over every stone. That's something that Pat Bowlen would do. And I think that we've seen that historically. The Broncos need to figure out how to get it right this time around. It's not as black and white, level of thinking to where it's just as simple as like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is going to be the new quarterback. It's going to be a process, folks. It's not going to happen overnight, and it requires patience from Broncos country, which, look, I get it's very hard. It's very hard to have that considering everything that's happened here. But one thing I do think that the next head coach needs to have, Sayre, they need to be able to manage the game. They need to understand personnel. That's going to be super critical because as we've seen with Vic Fangio, his downfall was not trusting certain guys. You have to trust your players. You have to trust your coaches to get the job done, and simply the new guy needs to have that. And one other thing that we talked about here, and I know you feel very strongly about this, what is one other thing that the next head coach must have here for this Broncos football team in 2022?
I think, to me, Cody, it's got to be investment in player development. I feel like that's a must. And I think, again, that goes back to what George Paton talks about. 5 coaches in 9 years. If you're going to be willing to invest in a coach for the next however many years they sign into a contract, whether it's like 5 years or 6 years or whatever the case may be, I think in that time frame, your commitment, and George Paton talked about this way back when he was hired, they want to draft and develop, and they want to re-sign their own guys. That's what he wants to be the formula. And of course, if you get an opportunity to go after a guy at the quarterback position, you go after it. But George Paton, we know that just like you said, he's been transparent. He's been open. He's been very honest. He wants to draft and develop and get guys in here who can excel in a program. So to me, the new coach and the coaching staff that comes in, player development has to be a priority. That was something that I think was like, there was 2 sides of that coin with Vic Fangio, right? On the one side of the coin, you have guys who like, Draymond Jones, you bring him in, a 3rd round pick out of Ohio State who basically only started 1 year in college. You turn that guy into a star on your defensive line. You have defensive backs that come in. They do amazing things in Vic Fangio's scheme. You put people in the Vic Fangio defense, they excelled. The other side of that coin is this, Cody. The other side of that coin is Drew Lock. The other side of that coin is, players X, Y, and Z who haven't been able to work out. You could point even back to, I know these guys aren't all high draft choices, but man, like Deshaun Hamilton, his lack of development, I feel like, is on the coaching staff. And to me, there's 2 sides to that coin. So I think the new guy that comes in, he has to bring with him people and coaches and evaluators or whoever else that they're going to prioritize player development, and they're going to be willing to be patient with these guys.
That's spot on, and I think that it summarizes what the Broncos really do need. In Broncos country, look, Sayre and I, we are eager for your thoughts. What do you think the next head coach for the Denver Broncos must have? What traits, what qualities, and what qualities must they avoid in the next head coach? We want to hear your thoughts here. Let us know in the YouTube comment section or tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But that will wrap up today's episode, Locked On Broncos, here on your favorite podcasting provider here on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you follow and subscribe, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Tomorrow's episode of the show, we're going to do a Broncos mailbag. So send in your Broncos mailbag questions by responding to the tweet that I put out on Twitter. That's got both Sayre and myself tagged, and the handle at Locked On Broncos. Reply to that, and we'll answer the best topics here on Locked On Broncos. Not to mention a look ahead, this offseason full of change. It's coming, Broncos country. Strap in your seatbelts, buckle in, hold on, because the ride, it's going to be fun. And Sayre Bedinger and myself, we have you covered every single day, all year long, because there is no offseason for the true fan.